Hello and welcome to another edition of What Does the Giraffe Say Media with me, Kathleen Retourne. We're an organisation that aims to connect people in conservation by holding live interviews on social media. Today, I am very happy because I am joined by Anna Mussi, and she is the manager for Rhino Revolution. So, Anna, I'm going to hand over to you. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got involved in conservation.
Hi, Kathleen. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on the show. So I'm originally from the UK. I'm a British citizen, and I've had a passion for wildlife and animals my entire life, and was actually on a gap year. I chose to do a gap year before going to university to study, which brought me to Africa, and unfortunately I never left. So I began volunteering my first year in Africa with African Dream Horse Safaris. I've got an equine background, and just combining the bush and of course, you know just how magical the bush is, the African bush, with the wildlife and the horses. I just knew I never wanted to leave. So after 4 years of working with African Dream Horse Safari, I was incredibly blessed to be offered a job with ProVet Wildlife Services, working under Dr. Peter Rogers, and gained experience and knowledge in both practice and wildlife veterinary fields, in surgical or consultational or even just research. And through him was then offered the position at Rhino Revolution in 2019.
So can you talk to us a little bit about Rhino Revolution, what it stands for, what it's about, and its kind of ethos here?
Absolutely. So my role with Rhino Revolution is operations manager. So I oversee all of our wildlife rehab, conservation and outreach education, and the anti-poaching. So Rhino Revolution is a non-profit organization that was founded in 2011, and the aim is to reduce what was then the escalating poaching crisis in critically important areas surrounding the Kruger National Park. And Hoedspruit, the town where I'm based, is exactly that. It's a town where all the private nature reserves have now dropped fences and opened to the Kruger National Park, which means the animals are now free to wander, free to move from one reserve to another. And so what we have is a 3-step approach, and using mainly holistic methods, we try and prevent poaching and try and encourage the existing species of rhino and pangolin and other endangered animals through community engagement projects, through anti-poaching efforts, including dehorning and a mounted and canine unit, and then also, of course, our orphanage facility.
And is there such thing as a typical day for you?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So things like our mounted patrols and our canine patrols, we've got camera trap projects for both rhino and pangolin. We have research projects based on lots of different reserves to look at feed species and feed types and all the different ecological aspects when you're dealing with rewilded animals. Those kind of things are quite standard, and they happen every single day. It's set times. But I mean, I could get a phone call at any time, day or night, to say that there's an injured rhino, or there's an orphan calf, or a pangolin been confiscated from poachers, and you just have to be ready and waiting to respond.
I mean, that kind of feeds quite nicely into my next question, which is that I know you do a lot of work with the rhinos at the orphanage. So can you talk to us about the orphanage? How do the babies end up in your care, and the kind of work that you're doing there?
Absolutely. So in total, Rhino Revolution has seen 7 calves come through its doors. We had a crash of 5 orphans, or 5 different animals, all orphaned by poaching. So their mothers had been killed by poachers for their horn, and they'd all come in at different times over the course of a few years, and were brought to the orphanage, where the rehab staff and the vet nurses are with them 24 hours a day. Usually they're at an age where they're still dependent on milk, so we obviously have to supplement them with the closest type of milk that we can find that isn't their mother's milk, and then slowly wean them onto grass and pellets, and try and stabilize them as much as possible. They're incredibly stressed, incredibly traumatized. Usually they're dehydrated. Some of them have got wounds either from the poachers or from prey animals that have tried to predate on them while they've been standing next to their dead mothers. And so after you've pulled them through all of that and you've treated them for colic and all the trauma and stress, then you have to raise them and try and rewild them as best as possible. So usually with orphaned rhinos, once they reach an age where they can be released, you have to make sure they're then self-dependent so they can survive by themselves. And we do a full rewilding project where we slowly reduce the interaction we have with these rhinos so they're not dependent on us, and make sure that they're ready to survive in the wild by themselves as wild rhinos.
And I understand as well that the orphanage is actually closed to the public. Is that part of what you're talking about with the rewild inside there?
Absolutely. I think Rhino Revolution's ethos, part of the orphanage aim and our goal is to not put any animal through our rehabilitation process without the end goal being them going back into the wild. And so what makes us unique is that we've got a very small team of staff. We've got 24-hour security, but a very small team of staff that is incredibly hands-on once those animals reach a stable state. And so we only interact with them in ways that is absolutely necessary. So to treat or to feed, to clean, pens or troughs and things like that. But there's no petting, there's no cuddling. We don't have day visitors. We don't have volunteers that can bottle feed or interact with these animals, because we do want them to be released and out as soon as possible. And we feel that it really does have a big impact on their ability to survive and interact in the wild. We actually want them to be interacting with other wild rhinos normally and naturally. And we're just hoping that all the steps we've put in place is going to allow them to do that quickly.
And how do you find out about the fact that there is a rhino that needs to be rescued? Is that part of your organization, or is that outside, or a combination of both?
So there's lots of, obviously, there's authorities involved, and it depends, it varies province by province. So South Africa is divided into provinces. We're in Limpopo province. The province next door to us is Mpumalanga. And so animals can't move from one province to another without permits. So if an animal is in our province, we would then get a call from Nature Conservation, from South African Police Service, or even the veterinarian that's involved that has gone to attend to the situation. And then they will then notify us there's been an orphan calf or an injured rhino that needs to come in, and then we'll be involved with all the people that are on the ground.
And how are they transported to you? Is that by trucks or a helicopter, or it could be both?
It could be, it depends on their age, so and their condition. We do have a rhino ambulance, which is very similar to a horse trailer, but it's been kitted out so that it has all of the equipment needed to transport a baby rhino in a critical condition. Got padded walls and air cons and things like that. Some of them are so tiny they can fit on the back of a vehicle. The adults are usually the ones that need transporting by helicopter. But if they are stable, then even just a transport float will work.
And what part of what your work is doing, you mentioned it earlier, there's dropping of fences, so the animals have got more freedom to roam and that kind of stuff. So how is protecting rhinos also helping to protect other wild animals and wild spaces?
So rhinos are mega herbivores, and they're part of what we call keystone species, which means they have sort of a vital role to play in the ecosystem. So things like keeping mud wallows open. So rhinos like to wallow in little pools of water and create mud wallows, which they then do as sort of tick and pesticide treatment, and it's basically like a spa for them. And what they do is they create and keep these water holes open for other animals. So they have a big impact on the ecosystems and sort of geoformation. And then through their dung, obviously they walk distances and they consume up to 50 kgs a day of grasses. So in their dung and dispersing their dung over long distances. They're then dispersing nutrients for other, particularly sort of dung beetles and other things like that. And then just to touch on that, they're also a host to parasites such as the rhino fly and the rhino tick, the specific type of tick that we believe would go extinct if the rhinos go extinct. So they have a big impact on the environment, and there's certain types of grasses that will only grow in very, very short grassland areas. So without these bulk grazers like rhino, those things would also not be able to survive with long grasses or dense vegetation.
And then I guess as well, if you have people out and about looking after the rhinos and making sure there's no poaching, that's going to have an effect on all the other animals that are going to be being protected at the same time.
Absolutely. Now, anti-poaching isn't just for one species, and the orphanage is open to any. We're mainly targeting endangered species just because it is so critical to keep those species alive. But our anti-poaching is for every single species within those reserves that we protect. And as you say, it's almost about. It's not just about the species; it's about the poaching itself. And if you condone the poaching and the breaking of the law and the brutal dehorning of one animal, you're then condoning sort of removing tusks from elephants or bones from lions or brains from vultures. And it's really just about the principle and trying to educate and prevent it from happening in the first place so that we don't have to take these orphan calves or the confiscated pangolins and go through the rewilding process.
And we've got a question coming through. Bear with me, it's on my personal page from Ila. And they're asking, do you guys have any government financial support, or is it totally funded by private initiatives?
We're completely privately funded. We're a non-profit organization. So 100% of any donation goes to whatever area that they want to support. So if your donation wants to go to pangolin, it will only go to pangolin. If your donations towards community engagement, it will only go towards community engagement. It's incredibly transparent that way, but unfortunately, we don't have any government support. We're completely funded by people like yourself.
And if people wanted to support you, what would be the best way for them to go around it?
I think get in touch. You're welcome to have a look at our website, rhinorevolution.org. All of our contact details are on there for email, Facebook, Instagram. Get in touch. There's donation pages. There's how you can help. If you are in the Hoedspruit area, get in touch with us. We'd love to show you the orphanage and to show you, meet the staff and show you what we're doing. And we also have a volunteer project for our mounted patrol unit as well. So I think have a look on our website. All the information is there.
Thanks. And also, if you're watching back home, please do go and find them on Facebook as well. They got all their projects and that sort of things on there, and you can follow all their updates. So give them a little like and follow there. You touched on it a bit earlier there, Anna, when you were talking about the different projects that you're doing. But I understand it's not just, although you are Rhino Revolution, there's also the Pangolin Project as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about pangolins? They're not an animal a lot of people are familiar with. I think it wasn't until I went to Africa that I actually learned anything about them. So can you talk to us a little bit about why they're under threat and why you then have this this side project to protect them?
Absolutely. So Rhino Revolution was originally formed for rhino. As I said, we've had 7 rhino orphans pass through our doors, 5 of which have been successfully rewilded. The other 2 are in their second stage. And while we had this orphanage, we also had the staff and the vet nurses and the veterinary knowledge to be able to assist in pangolin rehabilitation. And in 2018, this area where we're based had a massive influx of confiscated pangolins from the trade. So whereas when there's a rhino poached, the rhino will be shot, there'll be a carcass, and if there's an orphan, the calf will be there usually near its mother. Unfortunately, the pangolins, when they're poached, their survival instinct is to curl up into a ball. So they will just be picked up and then taken by the poacher off the reserve and usually only found through intelligence from the police service or an informant. It could be days or weeks later. So the pangolin were coming in and we were asked to assist in the rehabilitation. And what we found is that they come in all manner of compromised conditions. Some of them are kept in water, others have been kept and fed lettuce. Very few people know actually what these animals require. So they're in very, very poor health when they arrive. And for those of you that don't know, they are completely covered in scales. They generally walk just on their back legs, holding their front legs in front of them. They've got a long tail, and as I said, their defense mechanism, if as a last resort, is to curl up into a ball. And the scales are actually made of keratin, which is the same thing as rhino horn and our fingernails and our hair, and that's what they're being poached for. They're being poached for their meat on the traditional bush market trade, but also exported dead for their scales to, unfortunately, for Eastern countries, similar to rhino horn, for traditional medicine.
Yeah, it's a very sad story because they are just so vulnerable and they're such incredible creatures. We've got a question coming through from Winnie. Hi, Winnie. She's a regular watcher of the show, so always lovely to see her name pop up. And she's asking, if a baby rhino comes in distressed, does it help for it to be near another animal for company till it recovers?
Hi, Winnie. So each animal actually is unique. Every single rhino calf will respond differently. Usually in the initial stages, they are so traumatized, they just completely distressed, and putting another animal in straight away is probably going to end up to that animal or the rhino getting injured. So initially we try not to. We do have an ICU with padded walls. Sometimes you'll keep their ears muffled and their eyes covered just to reduce external stresses for them. But once they're stabilized and once they're a little bit calmer, then yes, definitely. Sometimes a sheep or a goat, something to give them company. And then when they're older, as soon as possible, you do try and introduce them to other rhinos, especially for that natural behavior and natural interaction, so that they can form a crash.
And how do you do the introduction to the other rhinos? Is it like a slow process? And are there ones that you think, okay, this one's going to connect better, or is a better, more compassionate rhino, or anything like that with their personalities?
Absolutely. They've all got different personalities, and it does depend on the individual. Every single animal reacts differently and has different personalities. Usually you would have them in separate bomas to begin with so that they can see and smell each other, but not necessarily have complete contact. And then you would slowly, depending on how the interaction goes, whether it's a day or a few days or a week, then you'd slowly be able to introduce them to each other.
We've got another question coming through. This time it's from Stacey Satterfield, again, another regular watcher, and again, always wonderful to see her popping up. And she's asking, do you find as locals become more educated about the pangolin, they will report wildlife crimes?
So from our side, it's still very early stages, but what we've found is the more educated people become in general about wildlife, the more willing they are to help. With regards to the pangolin, part of our community engagement that we're doing is we're holding think tanks for all manner of different people involved in pangolin protection in this area. So it could be community monitors, environmental monitors, it could be indunas, it could be chiefs, it could be people that are involved in the traditional medicine in the communities, lots of other non-profits, research projects. So we've put everyone together on a few occasions, and we've basically had a think tank and a brainstorming session about how we can approach communities and locals in lessons and education to better prevent pangolins being poached. And the information that we've had coming out of that has been incredible. And the focus that we have now is not necessarily on telling them that this animal is the most trafficked mammal in the world, and not telling them how valuable it is, but telling them how valuable a pangolin is to their community. So instead of telling them this animal is worth X amount of money on the black market, we're trying to come from the angle that if you leave pangolins alone and if you see them, it's a special thing because they'll increase your soil qualities, they'll reduce the termite damage in your houses, and to have a little bit of empathy from their side, but also to keep that totem. Pangolins are still revered in traditional medicine here in South Africa. So, they have a belief where if you kill a pangolin, it'll be 10 years drought in that community. So it's very interesting the angles that we're now leaning towards in terms of education. It's not just one set protocol for every single animal. Every different case is different.
That kind of fits quite nicely as well into my next question, which is again part of your organisation does have quite a big focus on the community. Can you talk to us about some of the projects that you're doing here and what sort of changes in attitude you're seeing?
Absolutely. So, for those of you that aren't aware, Hoedspruit, where I'm based, is the border of the Kruger National Park, but there's many communities, local tribes that live on properties bordering the Greater Kruger and the Kruger National Park. And most of those people have never been on a game drive, they've never seen the Big Five, they don't really have an emotional attachment to any of these animals. And it's incredible. Somebody said to me once, if I tell you I'll give you a year's salary to go and pick that weed, would you go and pick the weed? You've got no emotional attachment. You've got no idea what the name of that weed is. Would you do it? And if you take a step back and think, of course you would. So obviously killing an animal, it is obviously slightly different. But in that context, you can understand, these people are struggling and they don't have that attachment to animals as we do, whether it's dogs, donkeys, rhinos, or pangolin. So we've put together a community engagement program which involves the think tanks, as I spoke about. We also try and do a big World Rhino Day project in every community that we work in, bringing all of the locals together with veterinarians, conservationists, anti-poaching, Rhino Revolution, to talk about what we're doing and to get them engaged. We've also got environmental monitors who work in all of the local communities to educate and support and pass on the message. And then Rhino Revolution staff actually work in 5 different communities, giving conservation lessons and biology lessons Monday to Friday to all of the young school children, which are our future conservationists, to try and obviously breach that gap. And then just to add on top of that, on top of all of that, if we're doing any dehornings or any conservation-based projects and we can bring a busload of children in to experience that, they can then get a literally hands-on experience with the rhinos, which they will then go back and tell their parents, their grandparents, their friends, and try and again just expose them to all of that wildlife as much as we can.
And I understand as well that you do some work with Wild Shots Outreach, who were actually on the show last year, and they do some incredible work with the local communities, taking them out into the parks as well and getting them to learn how to photograph them and become passionate about wildlife. How do you kind of fit into that part?
So Wild Shots Outreach is one of the non-profit organizations here in Hoedspruit that we work with. Elephants Alive is another. And Wild Shots, one of our first dehornings of the Lucky Five, once they were released into the wild, we invited a group of Mike's children from Wild Shots Outreach to come. And they took the most phenomenal photographs of these rhino, and seeing these rhino through their lenses, through children that have never seen rhino before, the images that came from that were absolutely phenomenal. And 2 of them have actually won awards. One was the Young Youth Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and the other was at the Dubai Expo this year. Both photographs taken from these students that had never gone beyond the fence, had never seen a rhino in their life. Now, thanks to Mike and Wild Shots and Rhino Revolution, they've had this opportunity, and it's just wonderful. You can see in the photo, standing next to Mike is our community engagement coordinator, Karabu Chiliani, who's been with us for 7 years. and she's our outreach manager, and she's just incredible. And the way she pulls all of these communities together and puts that smile on those kids' faces is exactly what we're aiming to do.
It's a brilliant project, so thank you so much for doing that. We have a question coming through from Melanie, and she's asking, what is your opinion on dehorning rhinos as a way to prevent poaching? She's heard reports that poachers also kill dehorned rhino to avoid tracking the same animal twice.
Hi, Melanie. So unfortunately, dehorning is not the silver bullet. It's not the be-all and end-all. However, combined with rigorous anti-poaching and security measures, it has been proven to deter poaching. With regards to poachers killing dehorned rhinos to avoid tracking them, it is very different in different areas. So on these private nature reserves where the bush can be quite dense, and it might not be possibility that they come across another rhino on that incursion, on that one time that they've come into the reserve and they've risked their life to poach an animal. What the chances are is that they won't shoot that animal to prevent tracking it twice. They'll shoot that animal and try and get away with as whatever horn they can get. So remember, they're not going to shoot an animal and raise awareness via gunshots and then go and look for another one. They'll take the first animal that they see. However, if you publicize that reserve has dehorned, and if all the animals, a lot of these poachers have intelligence to begin with. If these animals are all dehorned, if you've reduced the risk versus reward, then you're giving them a much, much better chance. I hope that answers your question.
And we've got another question coming through from Valentine. Hi, Valentine. Hope you're good. And they're asking, is the government in your country helping your struggles in fighting illegal wildlife trade and the poaching of rhinos?
Funnily enough, they are in terms of court cases. So the court cases and the punishment now for rhino poaching is a lot more severe than it used to be. And we're now recently, in the last 2 years, just seeing our first successful court cases against poachers, and poachers not getting bail and not being released for rhino poaching, whereas in the previous years it was completely being disregarded. So in terms of all of the prosecution, sorry, is the word that I'm looking for. Definitely, it is a lot more severe, and it's becoming a lot more critical.
And he also had another question where they're asking, do you use technology to fight poaching, such as like the use of drones?
Absolutely. I won't name them, but there are a lot of organizations now using very, very high-tech equipment, not just drones, but night vision, infrared. It depends what angle you are looking at. So with drones, you obviously have to have one person monitoring the drone at all times, and the drone's battery life will expire after a certain amount of time, and you're going to have to choose what area to concentrate it on. Especially in areas with helicopters and pilots, you can't go into airspace with drones without special permission. So I think it has its place, but when you're working on 10, 11, 12,000 hectare reserves, and then the Greater Kruger, which is open to the Kruger National Park, it's a vast, vast space. So I'm not sure drones are the answer, but again, it's part of the arsenal, it's part of the anti-poaching, and there are people using them with success.
Excellent. Okay, well, I only have one more question left. Thank you everyone back home for watching. We've had some really nice comments. We've had people watching from all over the world, which is always wonderful to see. I always like to end things on a bit of positive note. Conservation can get a bit gloomy, so it's always nice to hear some positive things as well. So I wanted to ask you, Anna, what your favorite success story was.
Without a doubt, you have to read it all about it on our website. But one of our orphaned rhinos called Masangita, which means miracle, she was orphaned in 2015. Her mother was killed by poachers, and she was only 3 months old. She has been successfully released in 2017. And this year, we are very, very proud to announce that she's just had her first calf. So she was mated with by a completely wild rhino bull who had never been rehabilitated. She's then given birth to her first calf. That's a beautiful little female called Lesedi, which means light. And despite not having a mother, despite not having any mother to teach her how to raise a young, her maternal instincts have just kicked in. And both mother and baby are doing well, and we are monitoring them closely and are just over the moon. I can't tell you, we're like obsessed grandparents. She's just the most delightful thing. So that is our success story, and that is what we aim to do. That is conservation at its best.
And I guess as well, it's kind of proof that what you're doing is working. If you're seeing this animal that hasn't had the option to be brought up by its mother because of, unfortunately, due to poaching, but now it's become a mother itself and surviving and thriving and mating and having a child in the wild, that must kind of give you validation for the work that you're doing.
Oh, it does. It does. And it makes it all worth it. And it just gives us hope for all the other rhinos that have been orphaned and rehabilitated. They can be released. They can continue the gene pool and hopefully contribute to the survival of rhino as a species.
Thank you so much, Anna, for coming on. I've absolutely loved having you on, and your work that you're doing is absolutely incredible. And that, I mean, that picture of the baby rhinos probably made my day.
I know. I'm so glad we didn't go dark. I'm glad the power stayed on.
We managed, yes. Is there anything that you would like to say before we wrap up?
Just thank you so much. You know, the support from everyone has been phenomenal. And even during these tough times of COVID, Rhino Revolution UK, yourself, everyone that supported us, just a massive, massive thank you to everyone listening. Drop us a message, Facebook, Instagram, www.rhinorevolution.org. You can join our newsletter, and just thank you so much for having me.
And as she said, if you are watching back home, do give them a like and a follow and a share. If you're watching this video and you've enjoyed it, then please, again, give it a like, comment, share. The more people that see it, the more awareness that we can raise for conservation. So thank you, everyone, for all your wonderful comments as we've been talking as well. It's really appreciated. And I will hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.